Okay.
And can you see my screen already?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. And so I'll give an intro now as I go through the slides. So, Phil, thanks for having me on. I love this opportunity. I love the fact that we can still do presentations in this unfortunate situation, and that we still have all these really great online events that are helping to teach cybersecurity experts new techniques, but also get people to just basically meet each other and exchange ideas. And that's the big thing. And so my name is Rey Bango. I work for Microsoft, and most of you know Microsoft as the big evil empire, and so I would say that when I started at Microsoft 10 years ago, that was kind of the perception of Microsoft. We were the evil empire, but we've since changed dramatically, and now we're the hopefully the bastion for goodness, and especially in the cybersecurity world, going out there and trying to hunt down bad guys. And I like to think that I'm that ninja cat on a fire-breathing unicorn waving the flag. So it's been an interesting experience. Actually, I'm going to go into presenter mode. Hang on one second. Tell me if you can still see the screen. Can you still see it, Phil?
Yes.
Okay, great, awesome. And so when I started off, I actually was the evangelist for Internet Explorer, and as you can imagine, that was fun. Because we all know that Internet Explorer is the best web browser in the world, right? And so every time I'd go into a conference, I would go in wearing my flame retardant suit, and this is the way I would come out whenever I'd give a talk. It was a bit of a challenge because people were very frustrated, and I was very much into the web developer space. And it's interesting how now I'm in the security world, but it's only been a recent transition. I spent 28 years doing software development, and obviously 10 of those at Microsoft focusing on web development. And so going out to speak with web developers about browser compatibility and stuff was a real challenge because we had a very outdated browser. And even though we tried to make changes, it still wasn't resonating. And so we'd have jokes like this. And of course, you had Chrome and Firefox, and everybody loved them too. Those are the ones that everybody would look to. And you had the joke of Internet Explorer was the kid eating glue on the sides. So you can imagine how interesting that was. And even when Microsoft Edge came out, Edge was a great browser in the sense that it was a radical difference from Internet Explorer. It did support standards. It was pushing forward. There were still things that needed to be done. And now, of course, we have the new Edge browser that's Chromium based, and that's made a lot of people very happy. And because now it makes developers' lives a little bit easier. Their code, sharing code across different browsers is a little bit easier as well. And when you're talking about the enterprise does have a very strong affinity toward Microsoft. That's where Microsoft has played for almost the whole entire time that Microsoft has existed. And there's a big investment in that. And there's an equal investment, obviously, in hacker tools that target Microsoft technologies. So that's always fun as well. So going the Chromium route, I think, was a natural fit. It was a natural progression to try to help IT admins and help web developers be able to build consistent experiences across the board. And it also makes life easier for the Edge team in terms of being able to propose new features, and now they can actually create stuff that differentiates the browser from other browsers, and they can focus on user experiences versus trying to figure out, do I have the new cool shiny feature? Now, the interesting part is that when I actually ended up leading the developer outreach team for the Edge browser, and it was a great job. I loved it. And so at some point, I actually started looking at, how do I change the narrative a little bit? What do I want to talk about? I've been talking about web browsers and web standards for so long, and I noticed that application developers weren't talking about security. And that actually kind of sparked an interest there. I was like, oh, okay, that could be a good hat for me to hang on. What's the phrase? Something I can hang my hat on for the current year, and talk about application security and some of the challenges that the industry is seeing. So I set out to learn a little bit more about that. I didn't want to talk about web standards anymore. I felt like that was a message that we've already done for so long, and I wanted to try something different. And the more I got into security, the more fun it seemed, to the point that I actually wanted to go to DEF CON. And I remember tweeting this out, and I was really scared. Going to DEF CON was, I had read so much about it. I feared security people. I feared hackers. I thought for sure that I was going to go and my phone, I was going to have to throw it into a pit of fire after I came back from DEF CON. And of course, I took a burner phone. It was a flip phone, and then realized quickly that, oh God, I was one of those people that just, it was crazy. But ultimately, I did go to DEF CON. And what I saw was a group that was really interested in protecting others. They wanted to protect companies, they wanted to protect people, they wanted to protect services. And that really resonated with me. And so I really grew an affinity towards the security community. I wasn't expecting to go into security. I loved what I was seeing. I loved the people. And like everything, security has its challenges. No community is perfect, but I have to tell you, it felt like in the early days for me, and I felt like this bond with the security people, and I started building really great relationships, which made me continue to want to progress in security and talk a little bit more about it. And then Wannacry hit. I think this was a big turning point for me, and this is when I was reading about it. I was getting more into security, and I saw that Wannacry was affecting human lives. It was affecting not only people, and people would lose their pictures. All right, well, great, you lost your pictures, not fun. But when I would see that hospitals were being, having their systems locked out, and patients were being turned away for services, especially patients with critical illnesses like cancer and dialysis, that's when I said there needs to be more help, and I felt like I can contribute something. I had been in tech for quite a bit of time, and I wanted to see what I can do. And that's where I really started my path towards cybersecurity and getting a little bit deeper into how I can help. And it's interesting because everybody pointed me towards the AppSec route. And of course it made sense. I was a developer, and so why shouldn't I go the AppSec route? I have to tell you that I actually pushed back on that. One of the things that I try to stress to people is that, don't allow yourself to get pigeonholed just because you've done something for a long time. Even though I've done application development for a long time, doesn't mean that if I'm going to do a whole career change, that I should do AppSec. I wanted to explore everything. I wanted to explore network security, digital forensics, IR. I love red teaming. I love offensive security. That's something that's really cool. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have to focus on AppSec. I want to get my hands involved on a lot of different aspects of that. The one thing I did realize, though, is that AppSec is really hard. It is a challenge, and a lot of people don't realize that building good software is hard because ultimately we are human, and humans are slinging code, and sometimes there's time constraints. There's all types of challenges, and a lot of them have to do with business decisions. And as security professionals, one of the things that I urge you to think about when you get frustrated with your developers for not sanitizing their inputs or leaving their keys in a GitHub repo is to understand that they have time constraints as well. The same way that security professionals have constraints and deadlines and timelines and priorities, so do application developers. They have those same types of constraints and pressures and timelines from their management teams, and they're trying to do a good job. They're just trying to get the app out the door. Sometimes they're going to make mistakes. So I hope that if there's one thing that you guys take from this talk is that have empathy, because application development is really challenging. It's hard for people to build good software that is going to be secure, and they're not going to make a mistake. That's just, unfortunately, it doesn't happen. And we make mistakes as security professionals. They're going to make mistakes as well as application developers. And ultimately, this is what most IT people and security people think of software developers. They think that they're out there and they have martinis being served to them and they're partying, just kind of like the Jonas Brothers, basically. And in reality, if you look at the landscape of application developers, there's all this tooling that has to go into building their apps. This is, and I kid you not, this is real libraries that are in use. They're still in use today, even though some of them may not be the flavor of the month. They may not be React, for example, but there's still Ember apps out there. Travis CI is still used daily. Obviously, NPM is out there. You're going to see Bower for package management, and all these things are still used day in and day out because not only are developers building new apps, they're also maintaining legacy applications that have some older software. You know, it's funny to hear application developers kind of bashing jQuery, for example, but jQuery is still used in 80% of the websites on the internet, and sometimes it doesn't get updated, and jQuery has had flaws. And so there are still challenges out there, but this is the type of stack that that people are using day in and day out to build these really complex applications. And so, of course, you know, this is how software developers view IT admins. They, you know, they're Agent Smiths, and they want to crack down on everything. And no, you know, you can't have access to the server, and you can't have access to this library. But ultimately, these software developers need to have a little bit more flexibility and access in order to get the job accomplished. And especially as we move into containerization and Docker and all that fun stuff, there has to be a little bit more flexibility in how developers work with ops. They, you know, the concept of DevOps is to be able to have this cohesive unit of people who can work very closely together and streamline the development and deployment process. And so it can't be this adversarial type of perspective where you have developers and then you have IT admins and then you have security people. They all have to kind of work together because ultimately this stack here is the one that's being used, and this stack requires you to have some level of access to machines that could be compromised. So there's a responsibility. It's a shared responsibility between the developers and the ops folks to make sure that everybody understands how to do this in a safe and secure way while still allowing business to run as usual. Every so often, developers will make a mistake, and then yes, the IT admins will come down and they'll, you know, strike fear into the hearts of developers and take away access. And we all know that's what you know, the IT admins and security people look like right there when they get upset, you know. But ultimately, the IT admins, security folks sometimes are right. You know, when you see developers who are leaving, I don't know, passwords in code bases, this is a real thing. This is where somebody left, you know, an actual password inside of a code base. Or, you know, you have something, and I think this was, oh yeah, this was a supply chain attack, and somebody actually was including code from, they had compromised, if I remember this, they compromised an NPM package and included a crypto miner in there. And the one thing about developers is that, especially now in this whole age of package managers and kind of embedding code from other people, especially open source, a lot of developers are not looking at what's being included. And a lot of that has to do with the sheer breadth of code that has to be used in order to get something done. Sometimes taking these pre-made packages and just dumping it in there solves a very complex problem for you, but it opens up opportunities for malicious actors to include bad payloads just like this. And sure enough, I mean, this was something that was predicted many years ago. People saw this coming, and this is in the NPM world, but you know, PyPi's had this. You had Ruby Gems have one. This is not something new, but it's been something that was predicted that sooner or later supply chain attacks were going to really start having an uptick. And we're seeing that in so many different aspects. And so when you look at an NPM package, for example, this is an actual repository. This is how deep the NPM package dependency chain goes. Yes, no, I'm not joking. When you look at a dependency graph for this particular project, this is how deep it goes. So think about you're a developer and you are, you know, somebody comes to you and says, hey, have you verified all this code that you're including? How many of the developers you know would actually say, yeah, I've gone through every dependency that I include into my application and the dependencies of those dependencies to make sure the code is 100%. This is the challenge of modern day software development, where the developers are capitalizing on open source. It's making life easier for them, but they're also opening up opportunities again for malicious actors. And so when you look at this survey that was done by Sneak, and Sneak is a vendor that provides services for static and dynamic analysis of code bases, especially open source, it was really interesting because they asked OS maintainers, OS maintainers differ in their code auditing cadence. And so if you look at this, of the people that they asked, and this was and I think this was about 1,000, at least 1,000 developers. 26% of them said they don't even audit their code. Think about that. And at least 21% were doing it once a month. But think about the 26% that weren't doing it at all. That's huge. And this is open source maintainers, meaning that you could be incorporating software from an open source project that has never been reviewed at all. It's never been audited. And we're not even talking about third-party auditing. We're talking about the OS maintainer going through there, either using a static or dynamic analysis tool and checking for common vulnerabilities, checking for common patterns of exploitation. This is bad. And so the problem that developers have is that there's this concept of implicit trust. Unfortunately, many of them look at open source and just think, oh, that must be a good project because X number of people use it. Or it's open source and it has an MIT license. So yeah, I'm just going to bundle it into my code base. And they don't realize that a lot of times you don't know who the person is. You're just trusting blindly because it's open source and you think open source kumbaya, this has to be good stuff. And a lot of times it isn't. And so when they did another survey question, they said, how do you find out about vulnerabilities? 36% said we use a dependency management scanning tool. That's great. But 27% said they probably won't find vulnerabilities or know about it. That's a huge number of open source maintainers that say they probably won't find out about vulnerabilities. That means they're not checking CVE lists. They're not on notifications from the projects. They're not scanning Twitter for any issues. And sometimes I wonder, are they actually even looking at, let's say, their GitHub issues? And even GitHub has like Dependable that reports stuff. So sometimes it makes you wonder, what are they doing that they're not being notified? So it is a scary proposition to know that that many developers they don't feel like they know about vulnerabilities. So I was reading an article in Dark Reading, and this kind of struck me because this company, Positive Technologies, they inspected a number of web applications, and the average number of vulnerabilities that they found in web applications was 33 vulnerabilities. And if you look at 33 is a lot for web applications. It's not to say that it's not possible. I'm sorry, I just got my dog just barking. I got scared. Sorry. Give me a second to recover here. She always gives me a heart attack. I'm sorry about that. And that's a pretty high number, but it's not unheard of. I mean, sometimes you're going to find things like cross-site scripting and things like that, and but the thing that scares you is when there are things like SQL injection flaws or file traversal or something like arbitrary file upload, and more than two-thirds of the apps contain these critical types of issues. So it's interesting that in this day and age, we're still seeing things like SQL injection or directory traversal exploits, when a lot of that has been noted by OWASP for decades. Veracode, which is one of the premier app security vendors in the world, they polled 400 developers, and they found that just 52% of them update their components when a new vulnerability comes out. Think about that. So this is where this struck me, because this is what I saw as Apache struts, where Apache, the struts team had announced their vulnerability into their framework, and months go by and nothing happens. And so are you not updating because there's business constraints, time constraints, resource constraints, or is it just pure laziness? So this is really a scary proposition, that these developers are not going out there and updating it. So I'm wondering if there has to be more feedback out there, more sources of information that talk about these vulnerabilities and these components, or is it just lack of developer education in the security landscape? And to some extent, I feel like it is the last part. Developers typically aren't thinking about security, at least from what I've seen. Now, I don't want to generalize, because I know a lot of really great developers, but I also believe that a lot of developers, I think they depend on the frameworks they're using to provide that level of confidence that their code is secure. So they might be using something like React, or maybe they're using Vue.js, or maybe they're using Django. And they're assuming that those frameworks will cover the bases in terms of security. So things like sanitizing the inputs, or preventing their routers from actually modifying the directory's traversals. So it really makes you wonder what's going on, and I think there needs to be more analysis in the industry of what is happening, because web apps and APIs are the new endpoints no matter what. As more companies go to cloud native and they start really taking advantage of the infrastructure capabilities that cloud services like Azure and AWS and GCP provide, especially from a security perspective, I think that we're seeing actually, and I'm seeing this myself and through data, that bad actors are having a little bit more difficult time breaking through on cloud infrastructure. It's not to say it's not possible. Black Hills did a great presentation on Azure pen testing recently. But I think that's become, instead of that, I think the infrastructure becomes less of a temptation versus trying to compromise web apps, where these mistakes could actually lead to full system compromises. And interestingly enough, we're looking at Twitter today, and Twitter was hacked. The theory goes that somebody managed to compromise a third-party app that allowed API access, and may have gotten in complete control of the Twitter API, not the Twitter, what do they call it? The Twitter tweet app panel, whatever it is. Obviously, it's speculation, we don't know yet, but that's the running theory right now. Now, OWASP has been talking about this for decades. They've been around for a long time. They've talked about web application security issues, and they've outlined this. And so if you look at their most recent report, SQL injection is still #1. And so 10 years on, we're still into SQL injection issues. And this really shouldn't be the #1 problem anymore. I'm kind of shocked by this. And now we throw, of course, NoSQL into the mix and LDAP and stuff like that. But this is just a persistent thing. And if we took the time to actually sanitize our inputs, this is where we can kind of start mitigating a lot of these problems that these apps are having. It's not something that's simple. I don't want to minimize it. I think people are challenged, and I get it. But we shouldn't see SQL injection as pervasive as the issue is now. And it still happens day in and day out. Of course, you have legacy apps, and those could be a big problem. And when you have legacy apps that are just sitting out there, if you've ever been a software developer, sometimes you dread having to go back and fix the old stuff. But that stuff needs to be constantly monitored. It needs to be updated, and it needs to be adjusted with the new times that are going. The threat actors are getting increasingly more sophisticated, and we're seeing threat actors start at a very young age. There's plenty of hackers that are starting with great tools at a very young age, and then from there they evolve into these, I hate to say it, fantastic, hackers. Some go out on the good side, some don't. And so we need to, and they're thinking differently. They're thinking more innovatively, because when you think about young people, they're looking at things from a different lens. I like to use the whole Snapchat thing. And when Snapchat first came out, I remember that my daughters were like all up into it, and I couldn't understand it. I'm like, what's the difference between Snapchat and Instagram? They were like looking at me like, Dad, you're so old, but they were just looking at stuff from a different lens. And I think what's happening is the new breed of hackers coming in are doing that. They're looking at technology from a different lens. And that's how we're seeing evolutions in these compromises. So we need to get the basics down. And I think SQL injection should be one of those basics. And part of that is through what they call DevSecops. And so the main premise of DevSecops is shifting what they call shifting left. And that's basically bringing security towards the beginning of the development process versus what they used to use, like traditional waterfall methodology, where security was kind of like towards the end, and it was almost like an afterthought. If you start thinking about security from the beginning, and you start thinking about how your threat model applies to the things that you're building ahead of time, you can obviously design code it's not going to be foolproof, because I will never say that nothing's hackable, but you're going to greatly minimize your attack surface if you take a little bit more time ahead to really figure out what is your threat model and how do you compartmentalize the code in a way that minimizes that attack surface. So that's where DevSecops comes in. And there's a very strong push around that within the application developer community to start thinking a little bit more about that and partnering with security to focus a little bit more about incorporating security into the requirements gathering phase and even into each one of these phases, whether it's design, code, testing, or release. I like this. I'm glad that this is actually being something. This is something that's actually being thought about now, and people are taking this very seriously. But you can't do this all manually. I mean, if you look at some of the modern code bases, there are hundreds of thousands of lines of code. It's just impossible to say that you're going to audit any modern code base for any large-scale application. It's just a real big challenge, and that's where automating security comes in. So when you think about automating security, that's where vendors come in. I can't say there's a lot of open source solutions for this. It's a sad state, and so it's not like you can say, here's a free thing, let me just go run this. But there are some really great vendors that are offering solutions to help you, help you kind of make sure that your source code is at least at a baseline level that you can feel some level of confidence in, and then from there build up. So before automating your open source, this was from White Source, and this was a an image they gave me. Over 75% were aware of only 50% of their open source inventory. So if you're a company and you only knew about 50% of your open source inventory, you're missing out quite a bit. And so what happens to that other 50%? Where is it sitting? How is it being updated? Who's managing that? Is it vulnerable? Do you know about that? And that's where this whole timeline comes in. And it takes 6 weeks on average to approve a new component. So if you have a new vulnerability, you're going to wait 6 weeks to approve it and get it patched. That's rough. And so 90% have at least one vulnerability. Over 45% have 5 and up. And of course, compliance is a whole different world. And I'm not focusing on compliance, but that's a whole different aspect right there. I mean, if you are a company that needs to protect your intellectual property, I would hope that looking at software licenses and compliance is a priority for yourself, because that's the surefire way of getting yourself into a lot of trouble if you just assume that a license will work. You need lawyers to review that. So Snyk is one of the top companies out there that I really do love the fact that they have deep integration with so many different services. They have everything from editors like Visual Studio Code and JetBrains to GitLab and GitHub. And of course, they're in the CI and CD pipelines with things like Jenkins and Travis, and they support Docker. They really are a company that focuses on the end-to-end, the shift left methodology that I was talking about, where they try to cover security at all levels. Now, I'm bringing this up because I think it's important that when you're thinking about DevOps, that you know what the options are, and they're not the only company. There's, Snyk, there's White Source, there's Veracode, Black Duck. There's a ton of these vendors out there. I just happen to like Snyk. I know I've talked to them before, and I think they have a solid product, but so does White Source. White Source is another one that provides you with this, this visual representation of the issues that you have. So if you're a project manager or you're a development manager, having this insight into what the vulnerable aspects of your code are just makes life so much easier, because now you're catching a lot of the low-hanging fruit that you might not catch if you didn't have a system like this that can tell you have a high severity bug and you need to fix this. This is the type of stuff that you can go back to management and really focus on extending these timelines as necessary. I think it's important that when you're talking with your developers, when you're talking with senior leadership, when you're talking to the CEOs and the CIOs and the CISOs, that they all have insight into this, because this directly impacts not only the code base, but it impacts business. It's, if you think about the financial impact of a vulnerability or a breach, you're talking not only financial implications, but you're also talking about brand and reputation impact. And these are things that are critical to protecting. And so we can't minimize the application security world anymore. We need to make sure that application security is a priority. It has to be as big a priority as network security, as physical security. It has to be front and center. And so hopefully, when you look at some of these slides and these vendors, you can take some of that back and say, this is stuff that I can present to my senior leadership and tell them, we need this because it's going to help us build a better product, a more secure product, and it's going to help us protect ourselves from negative business impact. GitHub has been doing a lot of work to include security features like Dependable. It's fantastic. And I think most of you are probably GitHub users. And if you have applications or any type of repo, you've probably seen Dependable emails being sent to you. And so Dependable will go through and say, they'll look at your dependencies and say, oh, hey, you have an out-of-date dependency that has some form of vulnerability. And it'll help you actually determine how to fix that. And in some cases, it'll actually help you remediate those things directly. One of the things that GitHub did was they acquired a company called Semo. And Semo really had one of the best dynamic code analyzers in the industry. And so they bought that. They've now incorporated it, and they call it CodeQL. And the great thing is that if you're using Visual Studio Code, you can actually incorporate it straight in there and see results as you're building out your application. So from a developer perspective, the ability to have this lens into security issues as you're building out your code, that's pretty slick. I like that a lot. And one of the big things that I was really happy about was seeing GitHub acquire NPM. And the reason was because NPM is invaluable. Node.js has grown so much. I saw it when it actually started. And it's grown into this really great platform that so many people are building upon. And NPM became the package manager of choice. The problem is that NPM allows anybody to submit stuff, and it becomes a bit of a challenge to monitor from a security perspective. And so I knew, I know the person who was actually their head of security, and Adam Baldwin, and he's fantastic. And he actually ran the Node security project. And so when they hired him into NPM, I was really excited about that because I felt that we're going to have a concerted strategy around helping to secure NPM packages and doing regular vulnerability scanning and trying to find out the supply chain attacks which have happened in NPM. So now with the resources that GitHub provides, I'm hoping that NPM will continue to evolve the security posture and even maybe offer like let's call it, I don't know, NPM verified packages that have been specifically audited and developers can depend upon. And maybe it might be based off of, I don't know, the popularity of NPM packages. But I think that's going to be an important facet in terms of the Node.js community, having the sense of security that the packages that you're installing have been vetted, reviewed, analyzed, and you have some sense of protection against things like supply chain attacks. And of course, there are other great companies out there like Veracode, Qualys, and Black Duck. So, but this is not even an exhaustive list. There's a lot of opportunity for you to go out and evaluate different solutions that could fit into your CI and CD pipeline. So, as developers, if you are a software developer, if you're a security professional that works with software developers, I'd urge you to explore these options and try to figure out what is it that you can leverage to help secure your application code bases. And you have to work with your developers. Honestly, I know sometimes there is friction. Totally makes sense. There's different priorities, but we need to work with each other in that sense because web apps are the new attack vectors. That's where all these bad actors are getting into. They're not looking at buffer overflows, things like that. They're trying to find little web shells. Microsoft has published an article from our IR team that talked all about web shells and how many threat actors are actually capitalizing on that to get full system compromise. Now, one of the things I'm a big advocate for is security champions and finding people within the organization that can help to bridge the conversations between developers and IT folks. And it's It's not easy because you have to have a person, you have to have people on all sides that are willing to kind of sit down at the table and be advocates for each individual groups, but also understand how to build the bridges across these groups. So, but if you can do that, if you can find these folks that can build those bridges, you're going to streamline communication across all of them and help to set proper expectations across all the teams. Now, security champions, Jerry Bell from Malicious Link, he's one of the big advocates of this, and I love this, and I'm going to read it straight out. He said, I would summarize what I heard Ian say is that InfoSec needs to build bridges to better communicate with DevOps, which seems right. One of the major challenges I find is that developers often lack the perspective of the adversarial mindset. And I can tell you, being a developer, that's actually true. Until I transitioned into security, I really didn't know what a hack was. It was like some kind of mystical magic that you all did. And then I remember when I got my first shell, I was like, that's it? This is what happens? This is a shell? And it was eye-opening. It made me realize how simple sometimes a little mistake, how a simple little mistake could lead into a really bad situation. So getting into that adversarial mindset, and of course I had to do the very typical stock photo person with a computer wearing a business shirt and and the mask. Yeah, that's a challenge sometimes, because finding the right resources and the right information to share with your developers to get them into that adversarial mindset in a way that they can understand is hard. And if you go onto the internet and you go to YouTube, this is YouTube when it comes to security information and tutorial videos. This is it. You go onto YouTube, you just get blasted. So there's no way of I haven't found a really good way of organizing all these YouTube videos that are out there that try to teach you all these different techniques, and it's just overwhelming. So that's like when I decided to get in security, I actually needed to have somebody who would sit there and talk with me and explain certain things, and that's why my first training class was at Hacker House with Matthew Hickey. He goes by Hacker Fantastic on Twitter, and what I loved about this course was that it gave me the foundations to understand that adversarial mindset. There was no way I could pass the OSCP, in my opinion, with this course, because even though it was great, being new to the hack world, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I could learn all this stuff and I can be taught this stuff, but I have to practice it. It would take a long time. And so one thing I want to stress to you is that because you send somebody to a course, that doesn't mean that they're going to be productive day one. It takes time for them to practice the techniques that they learn, refine those techniques, truly understand how to apply those techniques within the right context, and then from there, learn how to defend against those techniques. So I would urge you all to think about how long you would be willing to give these folks who are interested in understanding about the adversarial mindset to get up to speed. And also I would ask, are you willing to step up and be their mentor and help them get to that point? Because that's going to be a critical factor on this. I also took courses from eLearn Security, which I highly recommend. SANS, I've taken courses with SANS as well. SANS has great courses, albeit quite a bit expensive, but their material is solid. So, and I'm just pointing these learning resources out because they vary in prices, but they also, in my opinion, having taken courses from each one of them, they all are solid. They can help to get somebody to, at least to a certain point, that they understand how to help protect and build better code. Of course, reading is essential. There's a ton of great books out there, so I would make sure that if you're in an organization and you want to help your developers be better security folks, try to find good books that you can share with them, that you can recommend to them, and make sure that you've read the book and that you outline key areas that you think are applicable to what is being built within your organization. That's going to be something that I think a lot of folks will struggle with, because I have all these books and I can't tell you I've read every single one of them. I have them there because I grab bits and pieces from each one. But if you feel like the Web Application Hacker's Handbook is critical to application developer success, I would urge you to take it, read through it, highlight the areas that are really important and applicable to your business, and then share that with your internal teams so they can actually capitalize on what you've learned, and then mentor them. Take it to the next level and say, let's sit down and let's do a brown bag on cross-site scripting. Let's sit down and do a brown bag on SQL injections. Work with them so that they understand it, and that way they can protect against it. Because ultimately, practice does make permanent. That's one of the best phrases I've ever heard. You need to get them involved in actually doing it so that it has to be hands-on. This is where brown bags and meetups, maybe even after work type of meetups, are critical. One of the things I love when I go to conferences is sitting down with people who are way smarter than me and having them just walk me through stuff. And I feel like my eyes are like open sometimes and my head is blown because they're so smart. You know, they're so talented and they're walking me through these steps, and I'm sitting there saying, oh my God, this is so cool. That's the type of stuff you need to look for. You need to get those experiences where people feel like, oh my God, that is so cool, but that is so scary. Once you get up to that point, they're going to be bought in, and they're going to want to make sure they fix stuff. And they have perfect projects for this, like OWASP Juice Shop, which is free. It's a Node.js based app using AngularJS as well. It's one of the more modern types of penetration practice apps that are out there, and it's free, and it's really great. And of course, you have DBWA. That's the old reliable. It's been around for a long time, but it's still so applicable. And I would definitely urge you to take a look at that one. If you're into DevOps and especially DevSecops, then I'd urge you to take a look at the DevSlot project. Again, by OWASP. And this is a great one from a DevOps perspective to help you kind of learn how to secure your DevOps CI and CD pipelines. But ultimately, as you go through, and this is what I love about Pwn School and the Dallas Hackers Meetups and Hack Miami down in South Florida where I live, is that building this strong network of people is what's going to help you learn and help you better understand how to help your own internal groups. I would tell you, invite application developers to security meetups. Build the network with them, build the relationship, help them understand what keeps you up at night, and then work to understand what keeps them up at night, because that's how you build the bridges, and that's how you build empathy, and that's how you build the solutions to securing your applications. If you can invite an application developer to come into a hacker meetup, and they come out of there saying, wow, I didn't know you can do that. Sometimes that's the only thing you need to do. That impetus right there is to get them excited about security. So build that strong network. And the other thing I will say is that in the security space, we do have a need for 3.5 million security professionals in the future. This is something that Microsoft has taken the time to really dig deep into and look. And so as you're going out looking for new folks to help secure the world, think outside the box. It's going to be really hard to find people that have 10 years of experience, whether 10 years of experience with IR and digital forensics and red teaming and OSCP and the GXPN and blah blah blah. It's just hard because most of those people are already hired and they're pretty happy. But there are a lot of people who come from other backgrounds that can offer a different perspective on security. And some of those perspectives involve everything from the skills that they've learned over a long career to geographical perspectives, because they may have lived in a different country that you're now working with, to just anything. I came from a non-traditional background. I came from a software development background, and I decided to transition 2 years ago into security. So thankfully I had somebody who was an advocate for non-traditional talent and gave me that opportunity. I would urge you to expand your vision of what a security professional can look like, and look for those folks in non-traditional roles that can come in and help out. Remember, security is bigger than just saying, hey, can you hack, or can you be a SOC analyst? Security is broader than that. You have security needs for people who are in marketing, people who are in training, people who are in social engineering, just people who can communicate. All these talents translates into something that the security community can capitalize on. So please make sure to kind of be open-minded and expand your vision of what a security professional can look like. Ultimately, we gotta keep looking for those great people and bring them in. And yeah, hey, listen, you've got this. Most of the folks on this, I think, this meeting they already have that tenacity, that drive to become better. And so we just need more people like you all to continue to recruit like-minded folks, people who want to make a difference, people who want to help defend the internet, defend companies, basically protect your mom and your dad and your brother and your sister and your family. We need folks who just want to be those advocates for the good stuff. And so I urge you all to look for them. You got this. We're all, we're good. And with that, thank you very much for listening to my presentation. So at this point, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those questions and do a Q&A.
Well, thanks, Ray. That was a great presentation. We do have a couple of questions in the queue so far. Someone says, speaking as a dev with so much know-how, what are some good resources for bug bounty?
Bug bounty, okay. I guess, Phil, you and I are kind of biased, in that sense. Bugcrowd is great. I would say that if you're looking for a bug bounty program, well, you have, obviously you have Bugcrowd and Hacker One, and those are the two big ones. And I think that's going to give you that opportunity to learn, learning on the job in a safe fashion. If you're looking for resources on how to get involved in application security and web app pen testing, well, that's where I think you need to look at things like Pwn School, for example. Phil is a great resource because he does a lot of web app pen testing. There are books like the web application, that book I just put, the Web Application Hacker's Handbook, I think it's called, which gives you an understanding of some of the things that you have to, some of the vectors that are applicable to attacking web apps. The Tangled Web is another great book. If you're more interested in courseware, then I would say that the course by eLearn Security, and what's that called? The web application pen testing course by eLearn Security?
Yeah, I forget the name of it, but it's a good course. They have the extreme next version of, but I've taken that. And I took the SANS course and the eLearn Security course. And at the time, I thought the eLearn Security course was actually a better course.
Yeah, they call it the WAP, W-A-P-T, but it's actually the Web Application Penetration Testing course. And I think if you're just getting involved into application security and this is what you want to kind of explore, especially from a bug bounty perspective, that's a solid course to take. And the reason is because most bug bounties are not going to be network and infrastructure type of pen testing. You're doing more of the web app pen testing. You're looking at the external facing stuff and you're trying to figure out how to get in. Now remember that just because you get into the web app doesn't mean that you have to stop there. That's where the networking pen testing actually comes in. So if you can take courses in network pen testing, that'll definitely help you down the road as well. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, like Ray was saying, as far as bug bounty platforms, Bugcrowd and Hacker One are good. If you go on Bugcrowd's site, their Bugcrowd University, they get some videos and tutorials. And if you go to Hacker One has the Hacker 101, which is their setup. They've got like an online CTF as well as some other learning content. So those are really good. And check out portswigger.net. They have their web application security academy, which happens to be the creators of the Web Application Hackers Handbook and Burp Suite. They've got like a whole series of educational materials on there from beginners all the way up to advanced level. And there's even like a link on there to some stuff on how to use Burp Suite. But those are good options there.
Awesome. And I think we have another question. What are some good resources for security folks to learn software development? So if you want to learn software development, I think it just depends on what languages you want to program in, what stacks you want to program in. But I always recommend Code Academy. I think it's such a great, it's a great system for learning. The other one is free code. It's called Free Code Camp. So it is free, and it walks you through the steps of a full stack developer and how to get familiar with some of the more modern stacks that are out there. But ultimately, those two are really good. Udemy is going to have a boatload of stuff. The hard part with Udemy is just trying to figure out what is actually good or not. I know that through Code Academy and Free Code Camp, those are really solid resources, and I've reviewed them in the past, and they should walk you through most modern stacks. I think that's a good opportunity for you to get more familiar with how developers think and what are some of the things that they should be looking at from a security perspective. Let's see, here's another question. Is most modern desktop mostly web apps? I think it just depends on what you're targeting. If you're targeting, let's say enterprises, I think enterprises are a mixed bag, but most of them are going web because it's just so easy to deploy and it becomes easier to make it accessible to employees. When you're talking about obviously .coms and things like that, then that's obviously web apps. The enterprises where I feel like you have a little bit more mixed bag. Now, this is not even considering mobile. Mobile is a whole different world, which I'm not familiar with and couldn't give you any answers on that. But when you're talking about application availability within enterprises, you're still going to have a whole lot of legacy applications that are sitting there. These are legacy applications that are desktop based, and they could be running everything from C and C++ to C# to Visual Basic. Some are still using PowerBuilder, which is something I used to build on in the mid 1990s. So look, the state of Florida is there. Unfortunately, the unemployment system was based off of COBOL, and they had to put out a call to hire COBOL developers. So I think a lot of the modern stuff that's coming out is going to be web-based in some fashion. You still may get a mixed blend where you have this desktop-based app that is dependent on, I think it was like a web shell to display information. So yeah, you're gonna have some web there, but it's gonna be a mixed bag. Any other questions? Well, you Phil?
Use the Q&A feature to.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
Yeah, just directing people that way, because I don't know if there's anything in the chat, and sometimes it gets lost in the chat if you don't put it in the Q&A.
Yeah, I was looking at the Q&A, so let's see. Any recommendations for AppSec tutorials? Phil, you want to take that one? Is that the one you answered earlier with like Bugcrowd University and stuff like that?
General AppSec there, and then in the OWASP website is good because there's a lot of stuff on secure coding and stuff out there. I mean, even mobile, and I think they added some IoT related stuff. They have links to vulnerable apps, the OWASP testing guides, and OWASP testing guides for like mobile and web app, because most people, like I know one of the methodologies Bugcrowd believes in is the Web Application Hackers Handbook and the OWASP testing guide. So those are good as far as from a testing perspective, but for secure coding, OWASP is a good place.
Yep.
So yeah, it's good to hear that you like the Code Academy. I'd checked out some of their stuff before in the past and really wondered about if that was really good. And so someone with your background is going with development experience. That's good to hear that it's a good resource.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And I think it is a good resource, and they put in a lot of effort to show you the at least the foundational aspects of that. And it touches on a variety of different programming languages, and they're constantly evolving. They've been around for a long time too. So I would definitely recommend that to folks who are interested in learning a little bit more about application development. So, you know, and of course, if there's any questions, if you're, you know, the folks here in phone school have any questions about software development or want to learn a little bit more about that or need help, I'm available on Twitter as well. So please feel free to hit me up at Rey Bango, and I'm happy to share any information I can.
So yeah, kind of to add to your free code camp, one of the things too is anyone's really wanting to learn web development, they take you through full stack web development, and as you go through the course and learn, they will set you up with nonprofits to get some experience doing projects. There's Ray's Twitter handle right there.
There's Free Code Camp. Code Academy. And I want to make sure I get the link because it's not Code Academy, it's Code Academy. Which always got me. It always messed me up.
Yeah, and the Code Academy, they probably have links off their site, but they've got a good YouTube page. They recently put out a tutorial on SQL recently. It's like a 4-hour tutorial on SQL.
Yep.
And so if you're, for people that want to do security research, bug bounty hunting, or web app pen testing, if you understand it a little bit better, you can, it'll make you a better bug hunter, be able to find those exploits easier and vulnerabilities.
So I think this question in the Q&A is for you. It's how does one get into Pwn School?
How does one get just to participate into our meetings each month? And once things clear up, we'll be back in person. So if you're in the Dallas and Denton areas, then you can attend in person, but these are just virtual each month. It's no formalized school. We just have different presentations each month. We've had workshops in the past. We've actually even had, mentioned Dave Kennedy earlier, one of his folks, Ben 10, came out to Denton last year and did a pen testing workshop for us. So we'll do that. We'll have different workshops and stuff. And I do workshops, different pen testing workshops periodically. So keep an eye out for those. I've actually been planning to do just something through Pwn School. I've done most of them through conferences, but probably coming up sometime, I'll probably some Saturday or something do the web application pen testing workshop or the network pen testing workshops that I do. One says, I'm looking for a mentor. Would love to learn. Yeah, so also to join our Slack channel. That's the Pwn School Slack channel. If you just go to Pwn School, you can find like our YouTube page, because we'll have Ray's presentation recorded up and on there soon. But if you go to that page, there's also a link, and I'll go ahead and post a direct link to our Slack registration system. You just put in your information there and you sign up to Slack. We've got several people in there that with pen testing backgrounds, different security backgrounds. So feel free to join there and ask questions. And feel free to reach out to me. I'm answering questions all the time on getting into pen testing and stuff along that lines.
Awesome.
Okay. If no one else has anything, unless you have anything else, Ray, I guess we're going to call it good. I appreciate you presenting for us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on here. And I think I'm going to run out and get some dinner now. So, okay. But this has been great. This has been wonderful. I'm glad I got a chance to talk about this, and hopefully I've helped somebody else with this information.
Thanks. And I think it's really, really important point of view, because a lot of people that join us at Pwn School are trying to get into security. So, someone that's been through this, it's good to listen to, because I like to tell people, if you know someone that's been through it, you get good vetted resources that they've tried, because there's some trial and error when you're looking for these resources. Not everything out there is good. So if you can find people that's been through it, they can help you save the time going through the resources that are not so great.
Absolutely. Agreed 100%.
And also the diversity of backgrounds. To me, that was one of the key points, embracing that. I always say that, I don't want people to get into InfoSec. I want them to bring something to InfoSec. We don't do security for security's sake. We're trying to protect something. So bring your specialty, whether it's databases or web app or physical or social engineering, those types of things into security,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love that. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a great evening. And Phil, thanks again for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks.
All right.